Welcome back to Sailing El Jaleo! This week, while we were anchored in Bogue Sound, which is right off of the Beaufort Inlet, I fly the drone over to Fort Macon State Park, and right off the coast is where Blackbeard's ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, ran aground. So we take a look at that area, and from there we hop back on the Intracoastal Waterway and we head down through the Camp Lejune firing range to Mile Hammock Bay, where we anchor for the night. And from there, we head on to Wrightsville Beach, and not far beyond that is Cape Fear River. So I'm not sure exactly how far we're going to get. I'm going to try and keep this one shorter. So I guess we'll see how far we get. We might as well go ahead and get right into it. Grab a drink, climb aboard, and let's get going. While we were anchored in Bogue Sound, I decided to fly the drone over towards Fort Macon to check it out. I think it's pronounced Macon. Someone correct me if that's wrong. But Fort Macon is a 5-sided fort. It's constructed of brick and stone. It has 26 vaulted rooms, and they are enclosed by outer walls that are 4.5 feet thick. In modern times, the danger of naval attacks along the North Carolina coast seems remote, but during the 18th and 19th centuries, the region around Beaufort was highly vulnerable to attack. Blackbeard and other infamous pirates were known to have passed through Beaufort Inlet at will, while successive wars with Spain, France, and Great Britain during the colonial period provided a constant threat of coastal raids by enemy warships. And unfortunately, this is as close as I could get to Fort Macon. It's right on the edge of a no-fly zone, so I was bumping right up next to it, and my drone was getting angry with me. The wreck of Queen Anne's Revenge was discovered on November 21st, 1996, and it's located in about 28 feet of water, 1 mile directly in front of Fort Macon State Park in North Carolina. The ship that would become known as Queen Anne's Revenge was originally built in 1710. She was a 200-ton vessel, and the ship changed hands a bunch of times. I can't talk today. And it was a slave ship for a while. The French Navy owned it for a while, and it was captured by Blackbeard in 1717 near the island of St. Vincent in the West Indies. There he turned it into his flagship. He added more cannons and more armaments, and that's when he started pirating. So he sailed his ship from the west coast of Africa to the Caribbean, attacking British, Dutch, and Portuguese merchant ships along the way. Shortly after blockading Charleston Harbor in May 1718 and refusing to accept the governor's offer of the King's Pardon, Blackbeard ran Queen Anne's Revenge aground while entering Beaufort Inlet in North Carolina on the 10th of June in 1718. Shortly afterward, he surrendered and accepted the King's Pardon for himself and his remaining crew from Governor Charles Eden at Bath, North Carolina. However, Blackbeard returned to piracy later that year and was killed in combat in 1718. After spending a night anchored at the beginning of Bogue Sound right in front of Sugarloaf Island, we got up super early the next morning to get going. And we wanted to get going because Bogue Sound is one of the not necessarily rare, but one of the instances when you're close to the coast where you can actually get a significant boost from the tide. A lot of times the inlets there are so many of them and they're so close together, it's really kind of a wash. The currents, as you go from inlet to inlet, half the time you're going with the current, half the time you're going against the current or the tide. So it's kind of a wash, but in this instance, it was not one of those times. Bogue Sound is very long. It's narrow, but it's very long. So you get a stable current running through the Beaufort Inlet and then down to the next inlet, which is 10 or 12 miles away. So the currents are a little more stable in this area, and we wanted to catch as much of that current as we could. We're a older, fatter, heavily weighed down vessel, so every knot that we can get definitely helps. And now that we're out on the coast, and we're getting further south, we are starting to enter into resource preservation mode, where time isn't, we want to get further south, obviously. I know January and, December and January are going to be cold no matter where we are. But we will be in Florida by then, so, it's going to be a lot warmer, obviously, than if we were in Delaware. But in these instances, it's more important for us to get, boosts from the tide where we can. So if I can, let's say I can travel intracoastally 40 miles comfortably in one day. If I'm going to be going against the tide for half of that day, and I know I'm going to be, and I'm only going, say, 3 knots versus, well, hi, Weegs. You mind if I finish this, then I'll get you a treat? Yeah, just wait. Give me 1 second, then I'll get you taken care of. So, as I was saying, if we can go with the current for 20 miles, then I know I'm going to be against it for 20 miles. I'll go from 6 knots down to 3 knots. And then the time that I'm motoring is twice as long. So there we're, hey, you guys, relax. So there we're obviously wasting resources. So rather than do all 40 miles in one day, I'll just, okay, Prinny, just wait. Give me two seconds, just 2 seconds. So I'd rather go the 20 miles, anchor overnight, and then catch the tide the other 20 miles the next day. Then we're motoring half as long because we've got the tide going with us the whole day, and we have just saved, let's say 5 hours worth of diesel. So the time isn't really, okay, relax, that valuable to us. It's more important to preserve resources. And here you can see is the start of a new day. We're just heading by the New River Inlet. And we wanted to start as early as we could because between the New River Inlet and then the next inlet is the Topsail Inlet. It's a pretty long stretch, I'd say somewhere around 10 miles, and the currents are pretty stable in that region as well. So we wanted to get up early and get on the road to get a boost from those currents. And once you get past Topsail Inlet, it kind of becomes that crapshoot I was talking about. There are so many inlets and tributaries that it's just kind of a wash all the way up to Wrightsville Beach. So we just kept on steaming through at that point. And it was going to be a longer day. It was around, I believe it was around 40 miles up to Wrightsville Beach. And the previous day, I didn't really show you much. It was just a time lapse of going across Bogue Sound. We did also go through the Camp Lejune firing range and also the Onslow Beach Bridge, but unfortunately the camera had fallen while we were traveling and I couldn't get back up there to write it, so I missed the footage on that. So apologies for that. When going into Wrightsville Beach, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking because it's getting towards the end of the day. You've already gone 35, around 35 nautical miles, and then you hit the Figure 8 Island Bridge. And this bridge opens on the half hour and the hour. Luckily, we got there on the hour. And I say lucky because the next bridge is 4.3 nautical miles away, and that's the Wrightsville Beach Bridge. And that only opens on the hour. So if you get here on the half hour, it's too far for us to make it in a half hour, which means we're going to be waiting at least a half an hour at the Wrightsville Beach Bridge. And if you miss that opening, or, if you get there at the hour, I'm sorry, I'm screwing this up. If you get there at the, if you get to the Figure 8 Island Bridge on the hour, that only gives you an hour to get to Wrightsville Beach Bridge. So if you make that, great. It's 4.3 nautical miles, and the currents in this area are they switch all the time. So it's really hard to calculate how you're doing in getting up to that. 4.3 nautical miles is right on the limit of what we could do normally in 1 hour. So it's just really nerve-wracking, and if you miss that Wrightsville Beach Bridge opening, then you're going to be waiting an entire hour for it to open again. So we poured on the steam, and luckily I didn't think we were going to make it. It didn't look like we were because we had been running against the current for a while, but thankfully about the last 3/4 of a mile the current switched again. And then we were up to 6 knots for the final push up to Wrightsville Beach Bridge. So we just made it. In coming through Wrightsville Beach, you'll see when we go through the bridge here, it's a pretty hoity-toity area, and then down the road is Carolina Beach and then Myrtle Beach. So these are areas that are a little more expensive when it comes to fuel. The next spot that I knew I could get cheap, or should I say reasonably priced fuel, was down in the Waccamaw River. And I hope I got that pronunciation right. Someone helped me with that. Waccamaw River at the Wacawachi Marina. And there they have fuel for $3.95 versus around $7 in this area of these, expensive beach towns. And I had done my calculation that morning before I left, and this year we're getting better fuel economy for a couple of reasons. One, last year when I fried my alternator, I didn't know what RPM I was running at. So I was running at a lower RPM than what I needed to be, or what I should have been. And that meant that I was spending actually more gas per mile because our speed was so much lower. So there's a sweet spot between about 1,800 and 2,000 RPM for El Jaleo, and that gives us the best fuel economy per mile, and I was running below that last year. And also last year I left a month later, so I was using more diesel for our diesel heater to heat the boat. So coming through Wrightsville Beach, I didn't want to have to stop and pay that exorbitant price for fuel. So I'd done the calculations that morning before we left Mile Hammock Bay, and I figured I could just barely make it to Waccamaw River and the Wacawachi Marina to get fuel. And also I had plenty of water left, with the 2 water tanks. I am using very little water, and plus I've got another, almost 30 or 40 gallons on deck. So I figured if I can get down to Prince Creek, which is it's like 3 or 4 miles away from the Wacawachi Marina, if I could get there, I could actually stay in Prince Creek for 3 or 4 days. I could do a bunch of loads of laundry, hang it out, get it all dried, and then go down to Wacawachi Marina for fuel and water. So that was the plan coming through here. Normally I had to stop in the past, but if I could make it to Wacawachi, then I would be saving myself $3 a gallon. So it was a little bit of a risk, but I figured it was worth the risk not to stop here to get fuel and just spend the night. And that's all we have time for this week, and I actually kept this video length down, which I'm a little bit proud of. If you do like our videos, please like, comment, and subscribe. That helps us out more than you'll ever know, and it doesn't cost you anything, so go ahead and hit that like button. I would like to give a massive shout out to our Patreon crew. Without your guys' support, I wouldn't bother making these videos. And our Patreon crew is Joan and Juddy Judnick, Val and Chris Alcorn, Denise Neeli Sackett, Sherry Erickson, Deb Shaw, and Matthew Spotten. Thank you guys so very much. Your support means the world to me. And I do have one legacy patron member. Her name is Joan Limbo. Unfortunately, she has passed on, but she lives on in our hearts forever. We miss you, Joan. If you are interested in joining our Patreon crew, there is a link in the description down below. That'll take you to our Patreon page where you can sign up. And there you have access to hundreds of photos and videos. I try and post 2 or 3 times a week to let you know real time what's going on, where we're at, and that kind of stuff. And you'd also help support the channel, which would be great. Alrighty, I hope you all are well, and we'll see you next week.